Let go! Somebody help me! Oh God! Oh God! Stop! Please! Please! Help! Anybody! No! No!
The first sign that something was wrong came at mile 12, just before the trail crossed Boulder Creek. I found tracks in the mud along the bank, large tracks. Barefoot impressions that looked human but weren't, each one 17 inches long and 7 inches wide with 5 distinct toes and a heel strike that sank 3 inches deep. I crouched next to them and felt my stomach tighten. I'd seen bear tracks plenty of times. These weren't bear tracks. The stride length was over 6 feet. Whatever made them weighed more than any human and walked upright on 2 legs and had crossed the creek heading east toward the willows. I took photos with my phone and measured them with my hand for scale and told myself it was probably a hoax. Hikers playing games, someone with fake feet strapped on. But the depth of the impressions bothered me. You couldn't fake that weight distribution. And the tracks disappeared into thick brush where no sane person would go just for a prank. I stood there longer than I should have, staring at those prints. And the forest felt different suddenly. Quieter, like something was listening. I shook it off and kept hiking. By 4 p.m. I reached Elbow Lake and found the designated campsites empty and undisturbed. I documented everything with photos and notes. Fire rings clean, no trash, bear box latches working. Standard patrol work. But I kept thinking about those tracks. I radioed Christine at 5 p.m. for my evening check-in, and almost mentioned them but decided against it because I didn't want to sound paranoid. She asked if I was setting up camp for the night, and I said yes, I'd found a good spot near the northwest shore. She copied and said check in at 8 a.m. tomorrow, and I confirmed. The sun was dropping behind the peaks and the temperature was falling fast. I pitched my tent 30 yards from the lake in a small clearing surrounded by lodgepole pines, set up my bear hang, and started organizing my gear. That's when I noticed the smell. Faint at first, musky and sour like wet dog mixed with rotten meat. I'd smelled plenty of dead animals in my career. This was similar but stronger. And it seemed to be coming from the willows to the west. I grabbed my flashlight and walked toward the smell, but stopped at the tree line because the willows were too thick to push through without making noise, and I didn't want to surprise a bear at dusk. The smell faded as I stood there. Or maybe the wind shifted. I returned to camp and told myself it was probably a dead elk somewhere in the brush. Predator kill. Perfectly normal. But I couldn't shake the unease. I cooked dinner early before full dark, boiling water for freeze-dried pasta and keeping my eyes on the willows the whole time. Nothing moved. The lake surface was smooth as glass and reflected the first stars. I ate quickly and cleaned my pot and hung everything in the bear bag and retreated to my tent by 7:30. Too early to sleep, but I didn't want to be outside anymore. I sat in my sleeping bag with my headlamp on, writing notes in my field journal about the day's mileage and trail conditions, and I kept pausing to listen. The forest was too quiet. No bird calls, no squirrels, no insects. Just wind in the pines and the occasional lap of water against the shore. I checked my phone. Half battery, no signal, which was expected this deep in the backcountry. My satellite phone sat next to me, fully charged, emergency use only. I turned off my headlamp to save batteries and lay there in the dark, listening. That's when I heard the first wood knock, a sharp crack like someone hitting a tree trunk with a baseball bat from somewhere across the lake. Then another knock, closer, maybe 200 yards south, then nothing. I waited, 5 minutes, 10. My heart was pounding and I felt ridiculous because wood knocks could be anything. Branches breaking, rocks falling, natural sounds. But they hadn't sounded natural, they'd sounded deliberate, paced. I turned my headlamp back on and unzipped the tent and looked outside. The clearing was empty. Moonlight turned everything silver and black. I almost called out, almost yelled hello just to break the tension, but something stopped me. Some instinct that said making noise right now was a bad idea. I zipped the tent shut and lay back down and didn't sleep for hours. At some point, I must have dozed off because I woke suddenly to the sound of something moving through the underbrush near my tent. Heavy footsteps. Slow and careful. I checked my watch. 2:47 a.m. The footsteps stopped. I held my breath. Then I heard breathing. Deep, rhythmic huffs from something large standing maybe 10 feet from my tent. I could hear it so clearly that I knew it wasn't a dream. My hand found my bear spray in the dark and I gripped it and waited. The breathing continued. In, out, in, out. A wet, rasping sound that made my skin crawl. Then the smell hit me. That same musky, rotten stench, but 100 times stronger, so intense it made my eyes water. I gagged silently and pressed my sleeping bag against my face. The creature stood there for what felt like an eternity, but was probably less than 2 minutes. Then the footsteps resumed, moving around the tent in a slow circle. I could track it by sound. West side, north side, east side. It was studying my camp, learning the layout. I wanted to scream, I wanted to turn on my light and yell and scare it away, but I was paralyzed with fear. The footsteps stopped at the south side of the tent. A long pause, then a low vocalization. Not a growl, not a howl. Something between a grunt and a whoop, resonant and powerful, and it vibrated in my chest like standing too close to a speaker. The tent walls shuddered. Then silence. I waited 10 minutes before I dared move. When I finally unzipped the tent and looked out, the clearing was empty. But the smell lingered. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I sat with my back against my pack and my bear spray in one hand and my flashlight in the other, watching the tent door and jumping at every sound. When dawn finally broke at 6:15, I stumbled outside and checked the area. No tracks in the soft dirt near my tent, no scat, no hair. But 20 yards east, I found a pile of broken branches stacked deliberately in the middle of the trail, each one snapped clean and arranged in a rough X pattern. I photographed it with shaking hands. Someone or something had built that structure during the night. I kicked it apart and kept moving. I should have radioed Christine right then. Should have reported the incident and requested extraction. But I didn't because I knew how it would sound. I heard breathing outside my tent and smelled something bad and found some sticks. They'd send a psych eval team, not a rescue. So I packed up my gear and continued north on my patrol route, telling myself I'd overreacted. The forest looked normal in daylight, birds singing, chipmunks chattering. I hiked 12 miles that day and checked 3 more campsites and tried to focus on my work. But I kept looking over my shoulder, kept scanning the tree line. That afternoon, I radioed Christine at 5 p.m. and reported all clear, and she asked if everything was okay because I sounded stressed. I said I was fine, just tired, and she reminded me to hydrate and get good sleep. I confirmed and signed off. I made camp that night near Shoal Creek in an open meadow with good visibility in all directions. No willows nearby, no thick brush. I built a fire bigger than necessary and kept it burning until midnight. Nothing approached. I slept in 2-hour increments and woke at dawn feeling paranoid and exhausted. September 14th. Day 3. I continued north toward the high passes. The terrain grew steeper and the trees thinned out into alpine meadows and rock fields. I felt better with more open space, less cover for whatever had visited my camp 2 nights ago. By noon, I'd reached timberline at 10,000 feet and stopped for lunch on a granite outcrop with views across the entire valley. The Wind River peak stretched north in a jagged line of snowfields and cliffs. I could see for miles. Nothing moved except hawks riding thermals. I ate an energy bar and drank water and tried to relax. That's when I heard the scream. high-pitched and piercing, echoing off the rock walls coming from the forest below. It lasted 3 seconds and cut off abruptly. I stood up and scanned the trees but saw nothing. The scream came again, closer this time, and it didn't sound like any animal I knew. Not elk, not mountain lion, not human, but almost human, with a wavering quality that made my scalp prickle. I grabbed my radio and called Christine. Static. I tried again. Nothing. I was too high up, too far from the repeater tower. I switched to my satellite phone but hesitated. What would I report? That I heard a scream. She'd tell me it was probably an elk bugling or a fox in distress. She'd be right to tell me that, but I didn't believe it. I put the phone away and started hiking faster, wanting to put distance between myself and whatever made that sound. The trail descended back into forest and I moved quickly, too quickly, not watching my footing. At mile 28, I rounded a switchback and nearly collided with another hiker coming uphill. We both shouted and jumped back. He was young, maybe 25, wearing a beat-up pack and muddy boots. His name was Tyler. He looked as startled as I felt. We caught our breath and laughed awkwardly, and I asked where he was headed. He said he'd been camped near Elbow Lake 2 nights ago and left early because something scared him. My stomach dropped. I asked what happened. He said he heard something large moving around his tent around 3 a.m. and it sounded like a person walking on 2 legs but heavier. And when he turned on his light, he saw a shape through the tent wall, tall and broad-shouldered, standing right outside. He yelled and the shape moved away fast, crashing through the brush. He said he packed up and hiked out at first light because he wasn't staying out there alone. I asked if he reported it to anyone. He shook his head and said who would believe him. I told him I believed him because I'd had a similar experience at Elbow Lake the same night. His face went pale. He asked if I knew what it was. I said I didn't know, but I had photos of tracks in the branch structure. He asked to see them, and I pulled out my phone and showed him. He stared at the screen for a long time. Then he said his grandfather used to tell stories about creatures in these mountains. Big hairy things that walked like men and stayed hidden and sometimes hurt people who went too deep into the backcountry. He said the Shoshone called them different names, but they all meant the same thing. Giants. I asked if his grandfather believed the stories were real. Tyler said his grandfather disappeared while hunting in the thoroughfare in 1993 and they never found his body. Then Tyler hiked past me without another word and I stood there on the trail, watching him go, and I knew I should turn around and follow him out. But I had 2 more days on my patrol route, 2 more campsites to check. And I was a ranger, not a superstitious kid. I kept hiking north. That night I camped in the open again, this time in a meadow near Indian Pass. I didn't build a fire. I didn't want to advertise my location. I ate cold food in my tent and lay in my sleeping bag with my headlamp off, listening to the darkness. Hours passed, nothing happened. I started to relax. Maybe the creature had moved on. Maybe Tyler and I had spooked it as much as it spooked us. Maybe it was already miles away. I was almost asleep when I heard the rocks. The first one hit 30 yards to my left, a heavy impact that thudded into the grass. Then another rock closer, landing 10 yards from my tent. Then a volley of rocks, 5 or 6 of them thrown hard from somewhere in the trees, impacting all around my campsite. I scrambled out of my sleeping bag and unzipped the tent and looked out. The meadow was bathed in moonlight and completely empty. No movement, no sound. I grabbed my flashlight and swept the beam across the tree line. Nothing. The rocks lay scattered in the grass, each one the size of a softball, too heavy to be thrown by a human more than 20 or 30 feet. But they'd come from at least 100 yards away. I shone my light into the forest and saw pairs of eyes reflecting back at me. Elk, just elk watching from the shadows. I exhaled and retreated into my tent and told myself it was nothing. Rocks fall naturally, slopes erode, But those rocks had been thrown and I knew it. I spent the rest of the night sitting up, bear spray in hand, waiting for another volley. It never came. September 15th. Day 4. I woke at dawn to find my tent stakes pulled halfway out of the ground. All 4 corners. I hadn't heard anything, hadn't felt any tugging or shaking, but the stakes had been loosened deliberately and carefully, just enough to destabilize the tent without collapsing it. I checked the surrounding area and found tracks. The same barefoot impressions from Boulder Creek pressed deep into the soft earth 10 feet from where I'd slept. Fresh tracks, made during the night while I sat awake. The creature had been here, circling my tent again, and I'd been too focused on the tree line to notice. My hands shook as I photographed the tracks. The stride pattern showed it had walked a complete loop around my camp, pausing at each corner to pull the stakes, then continued into the forest. It was toying with me, testing me. I packed up faster than I'd ever packed before and started hiking south. Patrol route be damned. I was done. I needed to get back to the trailhead and file a report and let someone else deal with this. I radioed Christine at 8 a.m. and told her I was cutting the patrol short due to wildlife concerns. She asked what kind of wildlife. I hesitated. Then I said I'd encountered aggressive behavior from an unidentified large animal and I was hiking out as a precaution. She asked if I was injured. I said no. She said she'd notify dispatch and asked for my estimated time of arrival at the trailhead. I calculated the distance. 29 miles. If I pushed hard, I could make it by nightfall. I told her I'd be out by 8 p.m. She copied and said she'd have someone waiting at the trailhead. That made me feel better, slightly. The hike back was brutal. I moved at nearly 4 miles an hour, barely stopping to rest or eat. My legs burned and my pack straps cut into my shoulders, but I didn't care. I just wanted out of these mountains. By 2 p.m., I'd covered 14 miles and crossed back over Indian Pass. The forest closed in again and my unease returned. I kept hearing sounds behind me, branches snapping, footsteps that matched my pace. I'd stop and turn and see nothing. Start hiking again and hear it resume. I was being followed. I knew I was being followed. At 3:30, I reached a steep section of trail that descended through a boulder field. And halfway down, I heard a tree shake violently to my right. A huge lodgepole pine, 2 feet in diameter, swaying back and forth like someone was pushing it. I froze and stared. The tree shook harder, then stopped, then shook again. A warning display. I'd read about this. Large primates shake trees and vegetation to intimidate threats. Gorillas do it, chimps do it, and apparently whatever was stalking me did it too. I backed away slowly and continued down the trail, moving faster now, not caring about the noise I made. The tree shaking followed me. First one tree, then another, then a whole section of forest 50 yards to my right, erupting in violent shaking as the creature paced me through the undergrowth. I broke into a jog. The shaking stopped. The silence was worse. At mile 24, I passed Elbow Lake. My campsite from 3 nights ago looked undisturbed. I didn't stop. I kept moving. The sun was dropping behind the western peaks and shadows stretched across the trail. I clicked on my headlamp even though I still had an hour of daylight left. I wanted the extra visibility. The forest felt wrong. Too quiet again. No birds, no wind. Just my footsteps and my breathing and the pounding of my heart. At mile 26, the trail crossed Boulder Creek and I saw him standing on the opposite bank. It wasn't a bear. It wasn't a person in a costume. It was something else entirely. 8 feet tall at least, covered in dark brown hair that was almost black, standing perfectly still on 2 legs with its arms hanging at its sides. The proportions were wrong for a human. Shoulders too broad, arms too long, head too large. It stood there watching me from 100 feet away and I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. We stared at each other for maybe 10 seconds. Then it took one step backward into the willows and vanished, just melted into the vegetation without a sound. I ran. I don't remember deciding to run. My body just took over. I splashed through the creek and pounded down the trail and didn't look back. My pack bounced and my gear rattled, and I lost my footing twice but kept going. I ran for a full mile before my lungs gave out and I collapsed against a tree, gasping, dizzy, my vision swimming. I fumbled for my radio. Christine. I needed to reach Christine. I keyed the mic with shaking hands. District office, this is Ranger Nakamura. Do you copy? Static. I tried again. Christine, this is David. I need immediate assistance. Do you copy? More static. Then her voice, faint and broken. David, you're readable. Your location. I gave her my coordinates from my GPS watch and told her I'd had a direct encounter with a large, unknown animal, and I was continuing to the trailhead at maximum speed. She said something I couldn't hear through the static. Then the radio cut out completely. Dead air. I checked the battery indicator. 3 bars. Plenty of power. But I'd lost the signal. I was on my own for the last 3 miles. I walked the rest of the way as fast as I could without running. The trail here followed the Green River through a narrow canyon with steep walls on both sides. Bad terrain. Limited visibility, thick underbrush. I kept my bear spray in my hand and swept my headlamp beam constantly, checking every shadow. Nothing moved. The sky above the canyon turned deep purple and the first stars appeared. My watch said 6:40 p.m. Another hour and 20 minutes to the trailhead if I maintained this pace. I could do this. I was going to make it. Then I heard the breathing again. That deep, rasping rhythm from 2 nights ago. Close, very close, behind me. I spun around and shone my light back up the trail. Nothing. The breathing stopped. I started walking backward, keeping my light pointed behind me, bear spray raised. My foot caught a root and I stumbled but didn't fall. The breathing resumed now to my left, in the underbrush along the river. I pivoted and aimed my light into the willows, 2 eyes reflected back at me. Yellow amber in the beam, set wide apart and 6 feet off the ground. We locked eyes. The creature stood just inside the vegetation, partially visible through the branches, close enough that I could see its chest rising and falling with each breath. Close enough to see the matted hair on its shoulders, close enough to smell that overwhelming musk. It didn't move, didn't charge, just watched me. I squeezed the bear spray trigger and a stream of orange mist shot out and the creature flinched and vanished into the brush. I heard it crashing away through the willows, moving fast, heading downstream. I turned and ran again, full sprint this time. I didn't care about conserving energy, I just needed to reach the trailhead. My headlamp bounced wildly and my pack slammed against my back and my lungs screamed, but I kept running. The canyon opened up, the trail flattened out. I could see the parking area ahead, a small clearing with a pit toilet and an information kiosk and my truck. My beautiful truck sitting right where I'd left it 4 days ago. I was almost there. 50 yards, 30 yards, 10 yards. I burst into the clearing and stopped and bent over, hands on my knees, gulping air. I was safe. I'd made it. Then I saw the damage to my truck. The driver's side mirror was ripped off. Deep scratches ran across the hood and doors, gouges that looked like claw marks. The rear window was smashed in, glass scattered across the ground. I fumbled for my keys and opened the door and climbed in and locked it and sat there shaking. The truck started on the first try. Thank God. I threw it in reverse and backed out of the parking spot and swung around toward the forest road. My headlights swept across the tree line. The creature stood there at the edge of the clearing watching me leave. Taller than I'd thought. 9 feet at least, arms hanging past its knees, face hidden in shadow. I gunned the engine and drove away and didn't look back. I made it to the district office by 9 p.m. Christine was waiting outside with 2 other rangers and a county sheriff's deputy. They helped me out of the truck and asked what happened, and I couldn't speak at first. Couldn't form words. Christine brought me water and I drank and tried to explain. I told them about the tracks and the nighttime visits and the rock throwing and the tree shaking and the final encounter at Boulder Creek. I told them something large and bipedal had stalked me for 3 days and attacked my vehicle while I was hiking out. I said I had photos and GPS logs and everything was documented. The deputy asked if I'd been injured during the encounter. I said no, but I'd used bear spray during the final confrontation. He nodded and took notes. Christine asked if I needed medical attention. I said I was just exhausted and shaken up, but otherwise fine. She said I should go home and rest, and we'd debrief tomorrow after I'd had some sleep. The deputy inspected my truck and photographed the damage and said it looked like bear damage, probably a young male testing its strength on vehicles. I started to argue, but Christine touched my arm and shook her head slightly. Later, not now. I got the message. We drove back to Jackson in separate vehicles and I went straight to my apartment and locked every door and window and sat on my couch with the lights on, staring at nothing. The next morning I met with Christine and our regional supervisor Marcus in the main office. They asked me to walk through everything again from the beginning. I did. I showed them my photos, the tracks at Boulder Creek, the branch structure near Elbow Lake, the footprints around my tent at Indian Pass, the gouges on my truck. They looked at everything carefully. Then Marcus said the photos were inconclusive. The tracks could have been faked. The branch structure could have been natural. The tree damage and tent stakes could have been bears. My truck damage was consistent with a bear encounter. He said I'd been under stress from being alone in the backcountry, and it was possible I'd misinterpreted some natural events and worked myself into a panic state. He wasn't dismissing my experience, he said, but there wasn't enough evidence to justify a formal investigation or area closure. Christine agreed, but suggested I take a few days off and see a counselor. I refused. I said I didn't need a counselor. I needed them to take this seriously. Marcus said they were taking it seriously, but they couldn't shut down 40 miles of wilderness based on one ranger's report of an unidentified animal. People see things in the backcountry all the time. Shadows that look like bears. Elk that sound like screams. It's part of working out there. I asked what about Tyler, the hiker who had a similar encounter the same night. Marcus asked if I'd gotten Tyler's full name and contact information. I hadn't. He said that was unfortunate because without a corroborating witness statement, they only had my account. I felt my face get hot. I told them I wasn't lying. I knew what I saw. Marcus said he didn't think I was lying, but he did think I'd been through something traumatic and I needed time to process it. He placed me on administrative leave pending a psychological evaluation. 2 weeks minimum. I argued, but he was firm. Christine walked me out and said quietly that she believed something had scared me, but she couldn't back me without better evidence. She said the photos I'd taken were interesting but not definitive, and if I really wanted to make a case, I'd need more. Clear video, multiple witnesses, physical evidence like hair samples or scat. She said she was sorry. I drove home and called the therapist and made an appointment for the next week. The appointment was awkward. The therapist was a woman named Dr. Ellis who specialized in trauma related to outdoor recreation. She asked about my experience in the forest and I told her everything. She took notes and asked clarifying questions and seemed genuinely interested. Then she asked if I'd had any hallucinations or auditory disturbances before the incident. I said no. She asked about my family history of mental illness. I said there wasn't any as far as I knew. She asked if I was having trouble sleeping or eating or concentrating. I said yes to all three, but it was because of what happened, not because I was crazy. She said she wasn't suggesting I was crazy. She said wilderness experiences could be extremely disorienting and our brains sometimes fill in gaps with frightening imagery when we're under stress. She said PTSD could manifest after any traumatic encounter, and it didn't matter if the threat was real or perceived. The symptoms were the same. She recommended I start on anti-anxiety medication and schedule weekly therapy sessions. I took the prescription but didn't fill it. I wasn't anxious. I was angry. No one believed me. No one was doing anything. And whatever was out there was still out there. I spent the next week obsessively researching Bigfoot sightings in Wyoming, historical accounts, Native American stories, missing persons cases. I found dozens of reports, hikers who'd heard screams, hunters who'd found massive tracks, campers who'd had rocks thrown at them. Most were dismissed as hoaxes or misidentifications, but some were compelling. In 1967, a trapper named Bill Garrett reported seeing a bipedal creature near Fremont Peak. In 1981, a family camping near Brooks Lake heard something large circling their camp for hours and found strange footprints in the morning. In 2004, a backpacker named Jennifer Rhodes disappeared on the Highline Trail and was never found despite massive search efforts. Her last known location was less than 5 miles from where I'd encountered the creature. I called the county sheriff's office and asked about Jennifer Rhodes. The deputy I spoke with said the case was still open but presumed dead. They'd searched for 2 weeks and found no trace. She could have fallen, could have gotten lost, could have been attacked by a bear. Happens sometimes in the backcountry. I asked if they'd considered other possibilities. He asked what I meant. I said never mind, but I kept researching. I found academic papers about primate behavior and territorial displays. I found forums where people shared their own encounters and argued about evidence and skepticism. I found myself falling down a rabbit hole of paranoia and obsession. Christine called me on the 8th day of my leave and asked how I was doing. I said I was fine. She asked if I'd gone to therapy. I said yes. She said the evaluation results were in and I was cleared to return to work, but Marcus wanted me on light duty for another month. Desk work, no solo patrols. I said that was fine. I didn't want to go back out there anyway. I returned to the office on September 25th and spent the next 2 weeks filing reports and updating trail maps and answering phone calls from tourists asking about wildfire conditions. It was mind-numbing but safe. I avoided talking about my experience with the other rangers. They all knew what happened, but no one mentioned it. Then on October 3rd, Christine assigned me to check on a remote campsite near the Wind River Range. She said it was just a quick day trip, drive in and drive out, no overnight stay required. She said she knew I was still on light duty, but we were short-staffed and she needed someone to verify a report of illegal camping and trash accumulation. She asked if I was comfortable with that. I should have said no. Should have told her to send someone else. But I said yes because I needed to prove I wasn't broken. I loaded my gear into a pool vehicle and drove out to the trailhead, parked and hiked 1.5 miles to the campsite in question. It was empty, no trash, no fire rings, no signs of recent use. I documented everything with photos and turned to hike back out. That's when I saw the marker, a cairn of stacked rocks, maybe 3 feet high, sitting in the middle of the trail where it definitely hadn't been on my way in. Fresh mud on the stones, built within the last 30 minutes. I approached it slowly and noticed broken branches arranged around the base in a familiar X pattern. My chest tightened. I looked around. The forest was silent. No wind, no birds. The same eerie quiet from 2 weeks ago. I grabbed my radio and called Christine. She answered immediately. I told her I'd found evidence of recent activity at the campsite and I was returning to the vehicle. She asked what kind of evidence. I said I'd explain when I got back. She said to take my time and be careful. I ended the transmission and started walking fast. The cairn sat behind me like a threat, like a message. I was being watched again. I knew I was being watched. I made it back to the parking area without incident and drove straight to the office. Christine asked what I'd found. I showed her the photos of the cairn and the branches. She frowned. She said it was probably just hikers being weird. I said it was the same pattern I'd documented at Elbow Lake. She said it was a common structure. Lots of people make rock cairns and arrange sticks. It didn't mean anything. I asked if she really believed that. She said she believed I was still processing trauma and I was seeing connections that might not be there. She said she was worried about me. I said I was fine. I just needed to be more careful. She said maybe I should take more time off. I refused. Over the next week, I volunteered for every field assignment I could get, hoping to encounter the creature again. I wanted proof, hard evidence that would shut everyone up. But I saw nothing unusual, just normal forest work, normal trails, normal wildlife. I started to wonder if Christine was right. Maybe I had imagined some of it. Maybe my fear had amplified natural sounds and shadows into something monstrous. Then on October 11th, I received a message through the district office from a man named Robert Torres. He said he'd been camping near Elbow Lake 3 weeks ago and had an encounter similar to mine. He'd heard about my report through local hiking forums and wanted to compare notes. We met at a coffee shop in Jackson. Robert was in his 40s, a software engineer from Denver who backpacked regularly. He seemed rational and calm. He told me his story. He'd been camped at Elbow Lake on September 10th, 2 days before my encounter. He heard wood knocks and saw a large bipedal figure watching him from across the water at dawn. He packed up immediately and hiked out. He reported it to the ranger station but was told it was probably a bear. He didn't believe it was a bear. He showed me photos on his phone. Dark, grainy, taken at dawn with a phone camera, but you could see something large and upright standing in the tree line. The image was too blurry to prove anything, but it matched what I'd seen. We compared dates and locations and realized the creature had been in the same area for at least a week, possibly longer. Robert said he'd done some research and found reports of similar encounters going back decades. He said there was a pattern. The creature seemed to return to certain areas repeatedly. Elbow Lake, Boulder Creek, Indian Pass, all places with thick vegetation, water sources, and limited human traffic. He asked if I'd reported my encounter to anyone outside the ranger service. I said no. He said I should. He said the more documentation we had, the harder it would be to dismiss. He gave me contact information for a cryptozoology researcher based in Bozeman who investigated Bigfoot sightings. I took the card but told Robert I wasn't sure I wanted to go down that road. It felt like crossing a line from professional incident report to fringe conspiracy theorist. He said he understood, but the offer was there if I changed my mind. I didn't contact the researcher. Instead, I tried to move on. I focused on work. I went to therapy. I started sleeping better. By late October, I'd almost convinced myself that I'd encountered some rare bear species or a disturbed person in the woods, and my exhausted brain had filled in the rest. Almost. But I still jumped at sudden sounds. Still checked over my shoulder when I was outside. Still avoided camping. The burn came 2 weeks later. On November 3rd, I was assigned to inspect a remote campsite near the Wind River Range. Different location from before, an established site used by hunters during elk season. Christine said it had been reported as vandalized and she needed someone to assess the damage and clean up any trash. I agreed. It was a short hike, only 2 miles from the trailhead, and the forecast was clear. I packed light. Day pack, water, camera, radio, bear spray. I drove to the trailhead, parked, and started hiking. The campsite was located in a small clearing surrounded by willows with a fire ring and a flat spot for tents. I found it easily. Someone had scattered trash around the area. Empty beer cans, food wrappers, torn tent fabric. I documented everything and started collecting the debris into a garbage bag. Standard cleanup work. I was so focused on the task that I didn't hear it approaching, didn't smell it until it was too late. The same musky, rotten stench. Overwhelming, right behind me. I turned and it was there, 5 feet away, massive, covered in dark brown hair matted with dirt and burrs. Face flat and wide with a heavy brow and small eyes that stared directly at me with an intelligence that made my blood freeze. We locked eyes for maybe 1 second. Then it lunged. I threw my hands up and felt its grip close around my upper arms, fingers digging in like steel clamps. It lifted me off the ground and I screamed and kicked and it turned and hurled me toward the fire ring. I had time to see the stones rushing toward me, time to realize what was about to happen. Then I hit. My left side slammed into the fire ring and I felt something crack and then I was in the coals. The fire had been out for days, but the ash was still there and my jacket caught immediately on a half-burned log and flames erupted across my shoulder and arm. The pain was instant and absolute. I rolled, kept rolling, got clear of the fire and beat at my jacket with my right hand, but the fabric was synthetic and it melted and the fire spread to my shirt and I could smell my own skin burning and I screamed and rolled again and again and finally got the flames out. I looked up. The creature stood 10 feet away watching me. Not attacking, not leaving, just standing there. I could see its chest heaving, could see its teeth, could see the way its eyes tracked my movement as I crawled backward away from the fire. Then it turned and walked into the willows and disappeared, just like before. I lay there in the dirt, shaking, my left arm and shoulder and side of my neck throbbing with a pain unlike anything I'd ever felt. My jacket was destroyed, my shirt underneath was charred and melted into my skin. I could see blisters already forming. I fumbled for my radio with my right hand, keyed the mic. "Christine, this is David. I need immediate medical evacuation. I've been burned." My voice came out strangled and weak, static. Then her voice, urgent. "David, what's your location?" I gave her the coordinates from my GPS watch. She said she was sending a helicopter and I needed to stay on the line. I said I would. She asked what happened. I said I fell into the fire. She asked if I could walk. I said no. Everything hurt. She said help was coming and to stay calm. The helicopter arrived 30 minutes later. Paramedics loaded me onto a stretcher and flew me to the burn unit in Salt Lake City. I don't remember much of the flight, just pain and nausea and the smell of burned flesh. I spent 4 days in the ICU while they debrided the burns and started the first round of skin grafts. The doctor said I was lucky. The burns covered 30% of my body but were mostly second degree with limited third degree damage. My left arm and shoulder and the side of my neck were the worst. They said I'd need multiple surgeries and months of physical therapy. They asked how I fell into the fire. I said I tripped. They asked if I lost consciousness. I said I didn't think so. They said it was unusual for someone to fall directly into a fire ring and not be able to roll out immediately. I said I panicked. They accepted that. Christine visited on day 3. She sat next to my bed and held my right hand and cried. She said she was so sorry. She said she should have never sent me back out there alone. I told her it wasn't her fault. She said the Forest Service was covering all my medical expenses and I'd receive full pay during my recovery. She said I didn't need to worry about work. She said Marcus wanted to visit but was waiting until I was stronger. I said that was fine. She asked if I needed anything. I said no. Then I asked if they'd found any evidence at the campsite. She said the site had been cleared and documented. No signs of what caused the accident. Just the fire ring and my scattered gear. I said okay. She squeezed my hand and left. That night I lay awake staring at the ceiling and replaying the attack in my head. The creature's eyes, its hands, the way it threw me, the way it watched me burn. It could have killed me, could have torn me apart, but it didn't. It just threw me into the fire and left, like a warning, like it was saying, this is what happens when you come back. This is what happens when you don't listen. I was discharged after 2 weeks and moved into a rehabilitation facility for another 6 weeks of intensive therapy. The grafts took, the infections cleared. My range of motion slowly improved. By January, I was able to dress myself and write with my left hand again. The scars were extensive. Shiny pink skin covering my shoulder and upper arm and the left side of my neck, with darker patches where the third-degree burns had been deepest. I looked like I'd been mauled. People stared. Kids stared. I started wearing long sleeves and high collars, even indoors. The physical pain faded, but the psychological damage was worse. I couldn't stand heat, couldn't tolerate the smell of smoke, couldn't go near a campfire or a grill without my heart rate spiking and my hands shaking. I had nightmares every night. Sometimes I dreamed I was back in the fire, burning, unable to get out. Sometimes I dreamed the creature was in my apartment, standing over my bed, breathing. I'd wake up screaming. My therapist said this was PTSD. She said I needed to process the trauma through exposure therapy and medication. I tried both. Neither helped much. The Forest Service offered me a medical retirement with full benefits. I accepted. I couldn't go back out there, couldn't do the job anymore. In February, I moved to Salt Lake City and started working as a fire safety consultant, teaching people how to prevent accidents and respond to burns. The irony wasn't lost on me. My clients assumed I'd been in a house fire or a car accident. I let them believe that. It was easier than the truth. The truth is that I was attacked by something that shouldn't exist, something that lives in the deepest parts of the Bridger-Teton National Forest and stalks anyone who ventures too far into its territory. I have the scars to prove it. I have the photos that no one believes are real. I have the memories that won't fade no matter how much therapy I do. And I have the knowledge that it's still out there, still watching, still waiting. The Jackson Hole News published my story in March with my burn unit photos and called me a survivor of a tragic wilderness accident. They wrote that I'd fallen into my campfire while cooking dinner and suffered extensive burns but managed to radio for help and was rescued by helicopter. They praised my courage and resilience. They got a quote from Christine saying I was a dedicated ranger who loved the forest. They mentioned I'd taken a medical retirement but was working as a fire safety consultant. The article made me sound like a hero. But I'm not a hero. I'm just someone who went into the woods and came back broken. Someone who saw something they can't explain and can't prove and can't forget. And now I sit in my apartment at 2:47 in the morning with every light on and the heat turned off, recording this testimony because maybe someone will believe me. Maybe someone will read this and realize that the stories are real, that there are things in those mountains that don't want to be found, that if you go too deep, if you stay too long, if you ignore the warnings, something might find you instead. And when it does, you won't escape unscathed. You'll carry it with you for the rest of your life. The scars, the fear, the certainty that you're not alone even when you think you are. That somewhere in the darkness something is watching and waiting and remembering your face. I haven't been back to the Bridger-Teton. I won't go back. But sometimes I think about Tyler, the hiker I met on the trail, and I wonder if he's okay. I think about Robert Torres and whether he's still researching encounters. I think about Jennifer Rhodes and the other missing people whose cases remain unsolved. and I think about the creature, what it is, where it came from, why it attacked me. I don't have answers, just questions that keep me awake and scars that won't let me forget. The doctors say the grafts will fade over time. The texture will smooth out, the color will normalize. But I'll never look the same, and I'll never feel the same. Because I know what's out there. I've seen it. I've felt its strength. I've smelled its breath. And I've learned that sometimes the old stories are true. Sometimes the wilderness holds secrets that are better left undiscovered. Sometimes survival isn't enough. You need to stay away. You need to listen to the warnings. You need to respect the boundaries that aren't marked on any map but exist nonetheless in the places where humans don't belong. It's 3:15 now. Almost time for dawn. I should try to sleep, but I know I won't. I'll sit here until the sun comes up and the city wakes up and I can pretend I'm safe for another day. But I'm never really safe. None of us are. Because somewhere in the Wind River Range, in the willows, in the high passes, and the boulder fields where the maps run out, something is walking on two legs and throwing rocks and shaking trees and waiting for the next person who doesn't believe. The next person who thinks they're prepared. The next person who thinks they're safe because they have gear and training and backup plans. The next person like me. And when it finds them, when it decides they've come too close or stayed too long, it'll teach them the same lesson it taught me. That survival isn't guaranteed. That the forest doesn't care about your permits or your radio or your protocols. That sometimes you go into the wilderness and you don't come back the same. Sometimes you don't come back at all. I came back, but I left something out there. Some part of me that believed the world was safe and predictable and governed by rules I understood. That part burned away in the fire. What's left is someone who jumps at shadows and can't sleep and knows that the line between civilization and chaos is thinner than we want to believe. Someone who carries scars inside and out. Someone who tells this story not because anyone will believe it, but because I need to say it out loud. Need to put it into words. Need to make it real, even if real means being called crazy or traumatized or unreliable. I know what happened. I know what I saw. And I know that somewhere right now, maybe at this exact moment, someone else is camped in those mountains. Someone else is hearing wood knocks and smelling that stench and telling themselves it's nothing. It's just the forest. It's just their imagination. And by tomorrow morning, they'll know better. They'll learn what I learned. That some things are better left alone. That some places are claimed by something older and stronger than us. And that when you ignore those truths, when you push too far into the darkness pushes back. Hard. Violently, permanently. My phone battery is at 12%. The recording is almost at capacity. I should stop soon. But I need to finish this, need to say the last part, the part that scares me most. Because 2 weeks ago I received a letter, no return address, postmarked from Jackson, Wyoming. Inside was a single photograph. It showed my apartment building, taken from street level. Recent. You could see my car in the parking lot, my window on the 3rd floor. And in the bottom corner, just barely visible in the shadows between buildings, a shape. Tall, broad, watching. I don't know how it found me. Don't know if it followed me somehow, or if this is a coincidence, or if I'm losing my mind and seeing threats where none exist. But the photo is real. I've shown it to no one because what would I say? That the creature from the forest tracked me to Salt Lake City. That it knows where I live. That it's watching me still. No one would believe that. I barely believe it myself. But I keep the photo in my desk drawer and I check it every night before I lock the doors, and I wonder if tonight will be the night I hear breathing outside my window. If tonight will be the night it comes back. If tonight will be the night I don't survive. And if that happens, If someone finds this recording and wonders what happened to the ranger who said he fell into his campfire, I want them to know the truth. I want them to know that I was thrown, that I was marked, that I tried to warn people and no one listened, and that whatever is out there in the Bridger-Teton National Forest is real and dangerous and patient, and it doesn't forget. It doesn't forgive. It just waits. And when you least expect it, when you think you're safe, when you finally started to move on, it reminds you that you never really escaped, that you were never really free, that the forest still owns a piece of you.